Welcome back, Mr. Goodberry. The First Star Logistics studio is fully equipped and ready to record.
Wild card weekend has concluded. I've got some thoughts, how it pertains to the Bengals. What can we take from these other teams in a lot of blowouts this weekend and apply to the Bengals to get them back to this spot at the very least, and hopefully not be one of those teams that were on the losing end of quite a few blowouts. This is Bengals on the Brain. I'm Joe Goodberry. The show is brought to you by First Star Logistics. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons for us. It helps out a lot. We got a lot of off-season content lined up. We're going to have our first film review of a draft prospect. That'll be on Friday's episode. This week is more of a reflection of what we can take from the playoff teams and a little bit of, let's talk about Willie Anderson, as the Pro Football Hall of Fame is going to vote down from 15 candidates and bring it down to 10 on Wednesday. So getting the Willie Anderson hype train moving is only a good thing, and making sure the good vibes are out in the world as those guys do their votes. We'll end this episode with a video that, well, I'll set it up when we get there. So first, wild card weekend. Whew. Right off the bat with the Texans and rookie CJ Stroud, handling the Cleveland Browns, like completely bringing the Browns back to earth, bringing Joe Flacco back to earth. I mean, that's fun for us, right? If you're a Bengals fan and watching that game, we definitely wanted the Texans to handle their business. And if you're an Ohio State guy, you definitely felt that even more with watching CJ Stroud legitimately play really, really well. I mean, he looks like a top 6 to 8 quarterback already. And some people may say top 5 already. He may be, but I think here's where I'm going to go, where what can we take and what can we apply? There's a few things here from the Texans. Number one is how much the scheme helps your quarterback and sets everything up and keeps your offense ahead of schedule on second and shorts, on third and manageables. So we're not in a situation where you're in obvious passing situations too often. And I think they do a great job, and that's why their coordinator is getting head coach interviews already. I think it's Bobby Slowick. And you can see the fully fledged run game behind Devin Singletary and a little bit of Dameon Pierce. And they live off that. And it's the play action, and it's the deep shots off play action. And Nico Collins looks exactly like T. Higgins, maybe a little bit faster than T. It's kind of been a while since we've seen full speed T. Higgins. But if you're wondering why the Bengals have struggled with the Browns defense so much, and then you watch the Texans and they're not struggling, and it's not like the Texans have a great offensive line. Sure, Laramie Tunzel at left tackle is fantastic. But the Texans are not a heavy 3-wide shotgun team, right? They're going to get under center. They're going to condense their formation. They're going to have a lot of pre-snap motions. They're going to only have 2 wide receivers out there and 2 tight ends. They heavily feature Dalton Schultz at tight end, which we'll get to that position and free agency. So Dalton Schultz, they signed this offseason for a very modest contract, been very, very good for them. But when you do that, and the strength of the Browns are their 3 corners, and you're taking one of those corners off the field because you're not going out there with 3 wide receivers, you're weakening that Browns defense. They wanted to play single high safety, man coverage across. That's fine. We got a lot of crossing routes. We got a lot of combo routes off play action. Make these guys cover for longer, because play actions typically are you're holding the ball a little bit longer to get the play off. So now these guys are covering for 2.5, 3 seconds, 3+. I don't care how good you are as a corner. And the Texans really did a fantastic job. They had a great game plan. And then when they were ahead, they knew what to do. And I said this, if you're following me during the game, if you do, at Joe Goodberry, I appreciate that. But I said after the first 2, it was 14-14 or something along that, and both teams score right away. And I said, the Texans got to put a cap on these explosive plays for the Browns, because Flacco was, and he always has been. It's why the Bengals killed Flacco in his career. they would put a cap on it and say, "You're not gonna have these explosive deep plays. You guys wanna run the ball all day? Fine. That is okay. We're gonna force you to check it down, and we're gonna come up and make these tackles." And Flacco's eventually gonna get to the point where he's gonna force a ball. And what you have to do is have interior pressure to get Flacco off his spot because he's so long and gangly that if you can get him off that spot in the middle of the field where his launch point is designed, his accuracy takes a hit, how he forces balls start to increase, and you're going to put that ball in harm's way. And Flacco ended up being picked off by the Texans, and they closed that game out. And the Browns have their challenges. I'm not going to talk too much about the Browns. A lot of people think that's it for them. They're over the cap. They have one of the richest owners in the league. We're going to talk about the cap and how you can manipulate it when we get there. We have plenty of episodes still before free agency. But the Browns are going to create 60 million in cap space and they will figure things out. But they have their issues and they got to retool. But I think the Texans are a good example for a lot of things. They added about 18 new starters and role players through free agency, bargain guys. Devin Singletary and Dalton Schultz are bargain free agents. Robert Woods, good fit, right? They're not spending too much on that. Sheldon Rankins at defensive tackle. But it goes even deeper. They made 5 waiver claims for guys that ended up playing role players. They claimed or traded for 3 offensive linemen. Like Shaq Mason is a good starting guard and has been his whole time. They got him for peanuts. The Bengals need to be aggressive in that front. I think we're in a free agent window for the Bengals where they're going to have to add a bunch of guys this offseason. They don't have a lot of guys under contract at all. So this can be a heavy free agent class for the Bengals. And I think it'll be a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 players, which that's fine. I mean, you can live in that because they need to add so many guys. It's reminiscent of the Mike Hilton and Shobi Awuzie, 2 players for 1 William Jackson, or getting Larry Ogunjobi and Trey Hendrickson to add to the defensive line in that free agents class, replacing Carl Lawson, right? So I think we could see that with losing Tyler Boyd, with losing DJ Reader and Jonah Williams. I think they will take that money and turn it into 2 solid players. But the Texans did it so well. They did a great job with it. Not only did they draft well and remain aggressive in the draft, they moved up to get Will Anderson and CJ Stroud. They had the number 2 pick with Stroud, but they wanted to ensure they got Anderson as well. Moved up and was aggressive to get their guy. I think there's lessons there as well. So a lot to take from the Texans, especially when it comes to adding players and adding talent, and then condensing your formations and going a little bit heavier and having a full-fledged running attack to keep the Browns off balance. And the Browns are still a kryptonite of the Bengals, so that's something we have to worry about, which is why I'm going to spend most of this conversation on that game because I thought it was very eye-opening. And then you got the Chiefs, Dolphins. I would say where most of us were rooting for the Dolphins on that one. They looked unprepared in the cold. Not much to say about that game to take from but I will say that we spent a lot of the first 6 weeks or so looking for Dolphins concepts, things the Dolphins were doing that we can emulate and absorb into the Bengals playbook. Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? We need speed, yada, yada, yada. And all that may be true and was valuable at some point because the Bengals did absorb some of it and you could see it and they got some big plays out of it. But the Dolphins went from averaging like 32 points a game to 22 points a game over the second half of the year. And it just wasn't the same. Too many injuries for them across the offensive line, the defensive line. They were a shell of themselves on defense. Injuries at receiver. Both guys started wearing down. They didn't have a tight end either. Like of all that, we're going to talk about pretty much every team in the wild card round using their tight ends to full effect. And the Dolphins were one of the teams who did not have a tight end have a big day. And we would say that's very similar to the Bengals. Even though we like Sample and Hudson for the roles they are, they're clearly not Dalton Schultz, right? They're clearly not Dalton Kincaid, even Dawson Knox. I mean, Cade Otton had a big day for the Bucks. Sam Laporta, obviously, while hurt, scoring for them. Travis Kelce goes unmentioned there, but obviously he's going to go down as maybe the best tight end of all time. So the Dolphins have their issues. That's another quarterback from the Joe Burrow draft class, Jalen Hurts and Jordan Love from this weekend, all playing. Jordan Love being the only one to win. And man, does he look good And Jordan Love looks like Aaron Rodgers. How about slow cooking a quarterback twice in a row? They may have something with Love. Honestly, Love looked very good. Very, very good. And the Packers, there's a lot to take from the Packers, and we will, because the Packers, very similar to the Bengals in terms of not being the most rich team in the league with an owner. They're publicly owned. They don't throw a lot of big guaranteed money out there. They don't sign a lot of free agents. This past draft, they drafted 2 tight ends. They drafted 2 wide receivers, getting big plays. I think they had the most rookies catch a touchdown pass in league history this year. The Bengals probably could have taken something from that. We did have Yoshi. We did have Charlie Jones, Chase Brown. All 3 scored for the Bengals this year. That was nice. So there was a lot of that. But getting the 2 tight ends, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, I mean, that is in a strong tight end class. They got value for both guys. Both looked very, very good. But also, they draft athletes only. If you wonder why their offensive line continues to work, also a similarity is the running backs taking pay cuts in Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones. We'll see how those paths probably diverge in a month or a month and a half when we get to March and the Bengals owe Joe Mixon a sizable roster bonus. Well, the Packers probably can't cut Aaron Jones because I think he costs $12 million in dead cap. See how it goes. Aaron Jones looked fantastic. But to go back to my point, the Packers only draft elite athletes on the offensive line. Only. And it's not just O-line, corner, defensive backs. They have strict testing, pre-draft testing filters. Their draft board is probably as thin as anyone's in the league, and it's because they prefer to only draft elite athletes. They'll take guys right off the board. I mean, it's like last year. And I think the Bengals might be similar in a lot of ways. They've only drafted athletes or mostly drafted athletes recently, other than on the offensive line. And I brought this up before with Jackson Carman, did not test. Billy Price did not test. I mean, Deontay Smith, Hakeem Adeniji, guys like that, they're just like okay athletes at best. Trey Hill, terrible athlete. So Jonah Williams, average at best. It's just, I don't think the Packers would have made those picks. And also at tight end, they draft 2 very, very good athletes, fast players. Whereas there's analysts that I follow that only do Packers stuff, similarly to how I do Bengals. But when Michael Mayer ran and tested, they're like, oh yeah, Packers won't draft Mayer now. And like, that's how strict it is. So when you see that run game, when you're watching that offensive line next weekend, pay attention to it. Pay attention to the 5th round picks like Zach Tom, who was an elite athlete and the Bengals bypassed, and watch him start for the Packers and do really, really well. So that's worth talking about. Even for the Cowboys on the other side, finding a way to falter, and just, it reminded me, the Packers to bring it to the Cowboys to bring it back to the Bengals, reminded me of the Andy Dalton years. The Cowboys have won a lot of games over the last 3 years, and they can't get over the hump at the playoffs. And in fact, not just get over the hump, they look bad. They're so underwhelming when they get there. They look outcoached. They look like they can't find a guy to make a play. Their best player this year, CeeDee Lamb, he looked in the playoffs. Micah Parsons, you couldn't get him going. It's a lot like that 2011 to 2015 Bengals. Very similar. You couldn't buy a guy to make a play. And the Cowboys don't bring in a lot of free agents. I know they're America's team, all this money, Jerry Jones playing this giant palace. They need to start attacking free agency differently, for sure. They could take a page out of the Bengals playbook for that. But Jake Ferguson, I mean, there's a guy that, as a draft prospect, strong 2022 tight end class, never dropped any passes, tested better than expected, even though he didn't have that type of production in college. And he's a very good player. He's a very good tight end. He's not dynamic. Well, we would take a Jake Ferguson, no doubt about that. And they drafted Luke Schoonmaker in round 2, which that was a terrible pick. Number 1, he was not high on our draft boards at all. And I'm not talking Bengals. I'm talking about myself, Jake Lisco of Locked On Bengals, and Mike Santagata of It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati, and a few other guys that help create that draft board. We do one every year. You'll see that if you're a new follower. We'll have our own rankings and grades and projections and yada, yada, yada. It's fun. And that most of that will be on Twitter. We will reference it here. We will show a lot of that here, especially as I watch prospect footage and tape and go through the grading process. Rams and Lions, fun game. Both quarterbacks, obviously backstories between their former teams. But man, the Rams finding Puka Nacua and basically saying you're the new Cooper Kupp, and then getting that tight, get a 1,500-yard season out of him. I remember watching Nacua when I was watching Blake Freeland last draft season, BYU offensive tackle that went to the Colts. And I remember thinking, like, who's this number 12? They are just chucking this ball downfield to him, and he's coming down every time. It's insane that system, an offensive system, Sean McVay, and I even struggle to say offensive system because they've changed it. They've scrapped what they were a few years ago that got them to the Super Bowl. They've had to scrap it because defenses figured it out, and they did, and a lot of the concepts remained, or at least the principles of using motion and misdirections to get guys open, to get Cooper Kupp open and Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell, and it works. And Kyron Williams, a 5th-round pick. So you got Puka and Kyron Williams, 5th-round picks. Can you imagine if the Bengals had a Puka and a Kyron Williams in the 5th round this year? And Kyron was 2 years ago. It was the year the Bengals took Tyson Anderson. But like, how differently would you feel about this team if they did that? Remember, the Rams went all in for their Super Bowl, traded 1st-round picks, backloaded all these contracts to fit as many guys in as possible under that roster, and they won. They beat the Bengals, right? And everyone's like, well, it was worth it because you won. But if it wasn't, and you guys would have had to tear apart this roster and rebuild completely, that wouldn't be worth it. Well, they're back in the playoffs. Seems worth it. Now their roster doesn't look great. They're barely hanging on, but still. There are 2 young guys carrying that offense in Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua. Day 3 picks. You guys didn't have high picks. The Bengals haven't. When's the last time they hit a gem on day 3? I'm going to harp on this forever. Because maybe it's Andre Yosevich. Maybe it's Chase Brown now. Neither of those guys are Puka and Kyron. Hopefully they are in a year. I don't think Puka would have done. He wouldn't have supplanted Tyler Boyd in the slot, right? So there's no way he ends up with 1,500 yards for the Bengals if they draft him instead of Charlie Jones. But it is interesting. They're probably the other team that doesn't have a great tight end either. They've always used a complementary piece, solid tight ends with the Rams. Lions are another to finish that game. Drafted extremely well. Know how to use these guys for what they need to be. Like the Bengals taking Dax Hill in the 1st round. Have you gone back and looked at that safety class yet? Whew, there's a lot of safeties starting. Nick Cross, Kirby Joseph for the Lions. Kirby Joseph was like the free safety in that draft class. There's other ones, Jalen Petre, Jaquan Brisker, all starters. But Kirby Joseph was I think Florida. Yeah, it was. And he had the most free safety snaps and had the best grade as a deep safety. And he goes in the 3rd round, I want to say. If that's what you wanted to replace Jesse Bates with, shouldn't have been that type of guy. And I'm not saying Kirby's like great. It's just because they won. It's the heat of the moment of looking at this team and saying, wow, everything they do is great. But their draft classes have been really, really, really good. And they've not followed like the consensus. They took Laporta, Jack Campbell, and Jahmyr Gibbs 15 picks before anyone had them. Now, I thought all 3 would be good players, but they went 15 picks before projected. And it doesn't matter. If you nail it and if it's correct, do it. Who cares what we say over the next 4 months if you guys get it right? Now, if you go out and take Drew Sample in round 2 when no one has them there and it doesn't work out, well, they're going to kill you a little bit. If you take a Jackson Carman when no one believes you should, we're going to kill you for a couple of years. But if you go out and hit it like the Lions do, you deserve credit, and the Lions do. And in fact, they just finished 31 years without a playoff victory. They snapped that and got theirs. I don't know if you heard the Mike Tirico call at the end, but it was the exact same call he used for the Bengals when Jermaine Pratt intercepted that pass against the Raiders. Immediately brought up that the nostalgia of that and the feelings of that night, which was an awesome game. And that now leaves, to circle back to the Miami Dolphins, the longest streak without winning a playoff game. 2000. December 30th, 2000 was the last time the Miami Dolphins won a playoff game. For a storied franchise, if you're over 40, the Dolphins are like one of the franchises. If you're under 40, they are a joke. They've never won anything in your life. They've never done anything. Sure, Dan Marino was cool and awesome, but that's like if you're 35 and under, 30 and under, Dolphins have never done a thing in your life. They need to figure that out. But I mean, someone's got to have the longest streak. The Bengals were at 32, Lions at 31, now Dolphins 24. So, I mean, I'm not throwing stones in a glass house here. I'm just saying, like, you're on that level now with the Lions and Bengals, or close. And then that was Sunday, and then on Monday you got Bills, Steelers. Living in Western New York, if you're wondering, was that blizzard worth delaying the game for a day? It was crazy, actually. There was a lot of snow. My brother went, just got off the phone with him a little bit ago. He said it was absolutely insane. He was like, it was climbing Mount Everest to get in the stadium. Like, the stadium rampways were not plowed and cleaned off. People were climbing on each other, holding on each other to get up to the 300s. And then they get up there and the seats aren't cleared. So you're sitting on snow. There was no assigned seats. Sit where you want, because it was that crazy. So, yeah, it seemed like it. But the Bills handled their business, took care of the Steelers. Great. Steelers sucked. I mean, let's be honest. I don't know how they got there. For the Steelers fans that want to fire Mike Tomlin because they haven't won a playoff game in 7 years, that talk about another streak of going a little bit longer than you expected. Crazy that they even got this far, to be honest with you. The Steelers are not a good team. They are lacking in a lot of ways. But again, I do think if they got the right quarterback, this team would be hard to deal with. Their offensive line has made drastic improvements. They were as bad or worse than the Bengals just 2 years ago, and they've turned it around pretty well. Despite Broderick Jones getting beaten against the Bills pretty badly, Broderick Jones, their first-round pick out of Georgia, has been going downhill the last few weeks, hitting a rookie wall. But it also serves as a reminder, because we're going to talk about this, rookie offensive linemen do not perform well. So if the Bengals are replacing Jonah Williams with a rookie offensive lineman, looking at PFF stats and production metrics in terms of pass block efficiency, they're probably not going to play better than Jonah as rookies. Even DeJuan Jones, someone's right now saying DeJuan Jones. You look at PFF grades, he did not grade out higher, or he's in the same range as Jonah Williams. So, like, that's, if you're expecting an upgrade, you may get a type upgrade. You may get someone that's bigger or more athletic, so you can do different things. But as a whole, you're not expected to have an upgrade. So you may want to get that veteran on a 1-year deal or 2-year deal at right tackle and figure it out from there, which we will get to when we have free agency and do more previews of free agency, which players make sense in those spots. But the Bills getting deep touchdowns to Dawson Knox, to Dalton Kincaid right away. You think the Bills regret giving up that 4th rounder to move up and get Dalton Kincaid, who ended up being their number 2 receiver this year in yards and catches? You think they regret giving up a 4th rounder? No, they don't. It's got me thinking about it lately, to be honest with you. Because in the next game, Kalijah Cansey tore it up for the Bucs, and he has all year. He's had a lot of flash plays. I kind of want to move up. Another thing with the Lions, too, you let the Lions get Frank Ragnow right in front of you as you take Billy Price. Isn't that worth a 4th rounder to move up 3 spots, 2 spots? But the 2 deep touchdowns for Kincaid and for Dawson Knox, the Bengals had 1 tight end targeted pass over 20 yards in 2023. 1. And it was to Irv Smith. Just 1. The tight ends balled out this weekend. If you can't see after this weekend how important the tight end position is in today's NFL, and it always has been, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying because we care about now and moving forward. But how you can go heavy with it, how you can run and use those guys to block, but also say we're going heavy and then throw out of it? Isn't that the idea? Don't I want to spread them out and then run the ball? And don't I want to go heavy and then throw the ball? Like to keep teams off balance? A tight end, you need a tight end for that. But I want a tight end that can split out and run routes. I want a tight end that can get in line and dig someone out and block. I want a tight end that can jump up over somebody. I want a tight end that can run after the catch. I want a tight end that can get deep. I looked at the 20+ yard, so downfield deep targets for the Bengals at tight end since Zach Taylor came here with, Uzama and Hayden Hurst. And it was 4 times, 3 times, 6 times in a year in 2019 when they had Tyler Eifert. You go back to 2015 and it's 11 times with Tyler Eifert. It's like, okay, that's not Zach Taylor, obviously. I'm just was thinking Eifert in 2019 makes sense that was their highest under Taylor. But then let me see what Eifert's high was, and that was 11 times in 2015. And that was on a stacked offense, so like percentage-wise. I also looked at Tanner Hudson's man coverage statistics. He had 5 targets all year. So out of his 49, 50 targets, depending on what source you use, 5 targets while in man coverage. So the Bengals, based on the numbers, feed the wide receivers when they get man, because that makes sense. You want to play man on Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, we're going to throw that way. But for them to only throw 5 targets to Hudson, and he caught 1 pass for 1 yard and had 1 drop also. His yards per catch were low, 37 out of 46 qualifying tight ends. His average depth of target was low, 27th or 26th out of 46. His yards after the catch were 28th out of 46 tight ends. Those are qualities I want. I want a guy that can get deep. I want a guy that can run after the catch. So I like Hudson and I like Sample. We started that, and I think a lot of people would want those two to be back in their roles. Hudson only lining up in line to the line of scrimmage 24% of the time. So used either in the slot or out wide 3 out of 4 snaps, 75% of the time. I like that for him. He's like a big slot. But a big slot you can't use in man, that means he's not a good enough route runner or not a good enough athlete. And then not getting anything after the catch, you got to be a stronger runner. You're 29 years old already. It's not like he's going to get faster, quicker. Might become a better route runner with experience, but he's not going to get that much bigger, stronger, right? So I'm still very much, after watching this weekend, wanting a tight end. Even a guy like Cade Otton for the Bucks, they just fed him. You want to double Godwin and Evans? We'll feed Cade Otton. And they did. It worked for them. Not that he didn't have a crazy game, but man, the amount of targets they felt comfortable giving him, eye-opening. Man, it's just every game this week was tight ends. Last thought on these games, tying it into the Bengals. The Eagles losing and how they looked. And I'm going to make a comparison. While every comparison is not 100%, based on some of the feedback I'm getting on Twitter, this is something I've been thinking about now here. I said, I feel for the Eagles because it's hard to get back after you lose the Super Bowl. We saw that ourselves, right? But I do remember the Bengals beating the Chiefs in Arrowhead for the AFC Championship game, and the way the Chiefs left the field and the way they talked afterwards, they looked exhausted. They looked drained. The Chiefs were coming off of their Super Bowl loss to the Bucks, remember? So having a long season for the Chiefs was multiple years. But those expectations and getting back, the Super Bowl slump or the hangover for the team that loses is well chronicled how hard it is to get back. A lot of them never make the playoffs. But we had the Chiefs make the playoffs. We had the Bengals make the playoffs. We had the Eagles make the playoffs. And the Bengals, their loss last year was, again, they looked exhausted. Burrow looked exhausted. The receivers, the O-line, that was all backups. But the defense looked exhausted last year coming off the field. And the way they talked, like they were just glad it was over almost, like the expectations and the sacrifices you make to go that far. It's not easy. And the Eagles look the same. And the comparison's different because the Eagles look like they're imploding, where those other teams were just out of gas. But maybe the implosion for the Eagles is what is the reaction to them being out of gas, and they just reacted differently than the Bengals and Chiefs did, and maybe that'll be the difference in the following years. But it might be a good thing that the Bengals have a full off season to gear up, regroup, and reset. And like I alluded to in the opening and to set up, there is the Pro Football Hall of Fame vote going down from 15 of the semifinalists down to the 10. And I honestly believe Willie Anderson has a shot here because number one, for the player he was and his impact, which we'll get to. But looking at the rest of the candidates, and if one offensive lineman does make it in the final five, is it he or Jari Evans? I'm not sure. I didn't believe that Evans was ever going to get this far. So, maybe I'm wrong completely, but I think Anderson, for a lot of these voters, will be ranked higher. And it seems like the momentum has been building slightly for Anderson over the last few years. And after Tony Baselli got in was it last year or the year before? I think it was last year. Might have been the year before. And then Joe Thomas last year. Might have been both last year. I should have looked at this first. But what triggered my mind a couple years ago was when Tony Baselli did get in. And looking at the 90s, late 90s to early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, he played to 2008 for Willie Anderson. But all the guys that made multiple all-pro teams are in the Hall of Fame now. All the tackles. Talking Willie Roaf, Will Shields, Orlando Pace, Jonathan Ogden, Walter Jones, Tony Baselli. The only other guy that's not is Willie Anderson, and he has gotten close now. He's knocking on the door. And I think it's even more impressive that he's a right tackle and doing this. Like now when you see the all-pro team that says left guard, it says right guard, and it says right tackle, it didn't used to do that. They would vote for Pro Bowl and all-pro, and it'd be 90% left tackles, 95% left tackles. In the video I've got that's going to play here, I've got the actual numbers. It's drastic. This was a clear response to the Lawrence Taylor era. If you're old enough to remember, and if you're not, then listen up. Lawrence Taylor was amazing. He was an absolute nightmare as a pass rusher. Maybe the best raw pass rusher of all time. And teams freaked out, man. Like when Joe Theismann went down and his bone is sticking out of his leg, the next generation was, from mid 90s was probably to early 2000s, mid 2000s was probably the best ever era for left tackle play of all time. I mean, all those guys I just listed, tremendous players, absolutely the best, some of the best left tackles of all time, other than, clearly Anthony Munoz. It was incredibly hard for a right tackle to crack that. Like every team was like, the guy's got to play the left side, number one. And they've got to be athletes. They've got to be big. Like it broke the brains of the NFL of how they were looking at offensive linemen from that point forward. They're like, we are not going to let this guy ruin our games. The Bruce Smiths of that time, the Reggie Whites, the Derek Thomas, and Reggie White played on the other side, on Willie Anderson's side, and then Michael Strahan was right behind them. But these guys that are breaking sack records during this time, Kevin Green, largely were all rushing against the left tackle. And it's not like that now. And I think we're more open to it now. And I thought about this when Lane Johnson didn't get his third straight all-pro nod at right tackle. Lane Johnson probably currently the best right tackle of this generation. He is. Until Penei Sewell beats him out. But the fact that we actually have guys now to compare to is rare. It's super rare. Even Tristan Wirfs of the Bucks. Again, we're going to bring up some playoff teams here with Sewell, Lane Johnson, and Wirfs. Wirfs moves to left tackle this year after Donovan Smith was cut. Because that's the prestigious position. Because that's still where they pay him. Orlando Brown Jr. still wanted to be paid at left tackle. We are still seeing the reverberations of left tackle versus right tackle. What we clearly see, because how many years did we go saying we need a right tackle, clearly see as you're going against TJ Watt and Myles Garrett comes over there and Michael Parsons goes over there and all these other guys that move all around, they're going to find your weakest link and they're going to go after it. You need a good right tackle. And the Bengals had one in Willie Anderson. In fact, they had a great one. Because Willie Anderson, and you're going to see in this video, and I want to make sure it's clear. I'm going to say it now, and then it's going to play in the video as well. He made the All-Pro team, first team All-Pro team, 3 straight years. He's the only guy to do that in the last 40 years of NFL football. No other right tackle has done that. He made 4 straight Pro Bowls. Nobody's done that since Jackie Slater in the 80s. It's not, what he did is not easy for a right tackle. And I think not just the reverberations of the position left tackle, right tackle, and how much more respected it is now after Willie Anderson, but I also think technique-wise, he and Paul Alexander being together for so long, I think allowed us to see an evolution in what offensive linemen were being taught. And now if you get into the weeds of the stuff with coaching and player evaluation, you see all the time independent hands. Can this guy use independent hands? And that means you're not just two-hand punching, right? Remember that if you're an old school guy who's two-hand punching, now that is not a thing. Like that, you do that, you're getting killed now. So you need to have independent hands, one high hand, low hand, wide hands, low hands. Willie Anderson and Paul Alexander perfected that together. That was Willie Anderson. Watch him. I just watched 1998 Bills Bengals. And he's going against Phil Hansen, and he's killing him with these low hands. I'm watching the year 2000 Willie Anderson versus Jason Taylor and Armstrong. Oh, what's his name? Trace Armstrong for the Dolphins. Both guys that year, 14 sacks, 16 and a half sacks, I think it was. Willie Anderson's killing him. Low, wide hands, independent hands. And to go along with his massive frame, super strong, long arms, nimble feet for a big dude, powerful run blocker. Like we know this, like he is collapsing that side of the line, collapsing the right side of the line, and then being nimble enough in pass protection, but with great handwork and technique. And now you see this in generations afterwards, and they're all doing these things. And he's training a lot of these guys. So his impact is still felt today. When they did the Bengals to the Hall rally, Bengal Gym, and they went up to Canton and they brought all these guys and brought up all the, it's got to be Ken Riley and Isaac Curtis and Kenny Anderson and Willie Anderson and yada, yada, yada. They had all these guys they did ceremonies and presentations for. They called me, Bengal Gym called me and asked me if I would do a video. This was I want to say might have been 2020 or had to be 2020 or 2021. Maybe in between, right? Like how it is now. But it was 3 years ago. And he asked if I would do a 3-minute video for Willie Anderson giving my argument why I think he should be in the Hall. And I did a bunch of clips and I made a lot of these arguments, stuff that before that people weren't bringing up. And that video has circulated since then. But I want to replay it here for you guys if you haven't seen it. I've updated some of the words at the bottom just recently because Tony Baselli is now in the Hall of Fame. And he wasn't part of the equation when I first did this video. But I'm going to play that at the end here. And I hope the voters make the correct decision here. I believe Willie Anderson deserves to be in. I think he was honestly a great player, and his impact is still being felt today. This is Bengals on the Brain. I'm Joe Goodberry. Do the right thing, voters, and get Willie Anderson in there. And, that'd be nice. That'd be a nice win for us this year. The show is brought to you by First Star Logistics. As always, my great partners. I appreciate you guys, too, for giving me the platform. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Watch some of the other First Star shows out there. They're all really good. Dave Lapham's killing it. Malik Wright's killing it. The whole group doing big things. The offseason's here. Hoo-day. Joe Goodberry here to talk about the Bengals' best right tackle in franchise history, but also make the case for the generation's best right tackle and what I believe is the best right tackle in modern football history. That, of course, is Willie Anderson. In 13 NFL seasons, Willie Anderson played 195 games, rarely missing a start,
was honored with 4 Pro Bowls from 2003 to 2006, was an alternate in 01 and 02, and had 3 straight All-Pro honors from 2004 to 2006. Known for being a powerful run blocker, Willie Anderson, with that massive frame, strong hands, and quick feet, blocked for some of the best running backs in Bengals history. Not just blocking for 6 1,000-yard seasons for Corey Dillon and 3 1,000-yard seasons for Rudy Johnson, Anderson helped block for the games that broke the single-game rookie rushing records, the single-game total rushing record, and Cincinnati Bengals franchise best running games and running seasons. But Anderson also became a master technician and a fantastic pass-blocking offensive lineman. Quarterbacks that saw their best NFL seasons were Jeff Blake, Carson Palmer, John Kitna, who had Comeback Player of the Year, and Joe Flacco's rookie season. The receivers that gained 1,000 yards while benefiting from Anderson's blocking may be equally as impressive. Chad Johnson saw 6 1,000-yard seasons, T.J. Houshmandzadeh with 2, Carl Pickens with 2, Darnay Scott with 1, and Derek Mason with 1 in Baltimore. But what makes Willie Anderson an all-time great right tackle? Don't take my word for it. Let the voters for the All-Pro, for the Pro Bowl, coaches and players, they've said it with their honors. In an era that included Willie Roaf, Jonathan Ogden, Orlando Pace, and Walter Jones, it was incredibly hard to crack the Pro Bowl and All-Pro lists, especially as a right tackle. And Willie Anderson did it. How difficult was this to do exactly? During Willie Anderson's career, there were 105 Pro Bowl offensive tackle seasons. Only 14 times was it a right tackle. Willie Anderson earned 4 of those. The last right tackle to make 4 straight Pro Bowls was Jackie Slater between 85 and 90. As far as All-Pro nods go, 95 offensive tackle seasons were honored. 11 were for right tackles. Willie Anderson accounted for 3 in a row. How rare is that to do 3 in a row? Well, the last one was in the 1970s, Dan Deerdorf, but you can also include Ron Yary and Rayfield Wright from the 70s. Those 3 guys saw 3 All-Pro honors in a row, and it hasn't been done since. And those 3, plus the aforementioned Jackie Slater, are all in the Hall of Fame. Those 4 guys are the ones that you should compare Willie Anderson to, and he compares favorably. Over the last 40 years of modern football, only Willie Anderson was awarded with 3 straight All-Pro honors as a right tackle. I wish we had today's advanced analytics back then. Services like Pro Football Focus graded Willie Anderson's final 3 seasons in his NFL career, and in his final season with the Cincinnati Bengals, 2006, Willie Anderson allowed just 11 pressures and 1 sack all year. His 98.9 pass block efficiency rating only trailed Jonathan Ogden's 99%. It's been said that Anderson only gave up 16 sacks in his 13-year career, so it isn't a stretch to imagine that most of his NFL seasons look just like this. And you may say, well, he played on the right side. And I would say, well, he played 15 games against Hall of Fame edge rushers, and he surrendered 1 sack to the all-time sack leader Bruce Smith with just 19 seconds to go while the Bengals are down by 2 scores. It happens. One of those Hall of Famers, Michael Strahan, says Willie Anderson is the generation's best right tackle. But I think it goes a step further. I think he's the best right tackle in modern football history, and his accolades and honors agree. And because of all that, I believe that Willie Anderson is very deserving of the opportunity to be enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Dave Lapham here, and every day I am grateful for my experience to have played professional football. As a player, I realize self-motivation, leadership, and appreciating your teammates are key. At First Star Logistics, you can use those same attributes to create the life you want for you and your family. Build your future by working hard like I did. You'll see results both on and off the field. Call First Star Logistics today and be part of our winning team.
Opportunity knocking.